So this is a quick little video just on a very generic phylogenetic tree here. I guess we could say, let's talk about phylogeny, or maybe let's talk about the domain breakdown between eukaryotes and archaeans and true bacterias. And so in the last video, we talked about there were two major breakdowns of cell types. There's the prokaryotic organisms, which are things that lack a nucleus. That would be all of your different bacterias. And there's actually two different domains in that grouping. The bacterians, which are the true bacterians, right? That's over here on the left-hand side of this graphic. And then there's the archaeans, or the archaea bacteria. And archaea means the ancient ones. And we originally gave them that categorization because we thought they were the more ancient types of life on the planet. The idea that these are things that can grow in extremely hot or extremely cold or crazy high methane environments or super salty environments. And so we kind of got this idea that early Earth was probably a pretty hostile environment. And so the Archaeans might have been the first things on the planet. But the more we've actually studied that, the more we're not entirely sure if that's the case. There's a large debate between whether the bacterians, things like E. coli and Staphylococcus that we know today, or the extremophiles like the Archaeans were the first bacteria. And truthfully, for what we're studying right here, it doesn't really matter which ones came first. But what does matter is they are both groups are prokaryotes, meaning they lack a nucleus. They're very simplified. There's no true membrane-bound organelles. These are things that do have DNA, but is not enough DNA for it to be really requiring a nucleus. And so they have all of their DNA in this area that we kind of confusingly call the nucleoid region, which is really just where their DNA is found. They've also got these cool little chromosomal ring structures called plasmids, which they can use to exchange genes with other bacteria, or they can just use them as extra copies of DNA. And then the bacterians have a really unique carbohydrate in their cell walls. And that carbohydrate is something called peptidoglycan. And peptidoglycan, really, it's just a complex carbohydrate, complex sugar that is used to structurally build these fairly unique cell walls. And so all of the different bacteria domain have this one carbohydrate called peptidoglycan, and it comes in all sorts of different like structures and shapes and sizes and formations. You see over here where it talks about like gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, but it doesn't really matter how the categorization works. All that really matters is that it's the carbohydrate that is found in the domain bacteria. The archaeans don't have that one specific carbohydrate. They have a whole bunch of really unique and specific carbohydrates and lipids as well that allow them to live in those crazy extreme environments, but they don't have peptidoglycan. And so because that is kind of the like defining thing for the domain bacteria, we put them in their own separate grouping. In fact, if you look on this phylogenetic tree, and I get it, this is very generic, right? This is kind of the evolutionary breakdown where that branch in the middle is the last universal common ancestor between all of life as we know it. You may notice that the original forking or branching point on that phylogenetic tree separated the bacterians from everything else. And so as crazy as it sounds, the Archaea and Eubacteria separation point is actually on two different branches. And on that Archaean branch is actually where we find all of the eukaryotes, all of the nuclear enclosed life, right? And so that would be everything from animals and plants and fungus and protists and all those crazy things, right? They've got their DNA in a nuclear envelope in a little container that protects their DNA. They also have a great complexity to what goes on inside of those cells, not least of which being that they all contain membrane-bound organelles. So not just like the ribosomes that you'll find over there in bacterians, which everything has ribosomes. It's not a true organelle. It's not membrane separated, but it is all those things like endoplasmic reticulums and Golgi apparatus and all those cool things that make cells that make up you and me. All of those organelles, those structures that give the very specific functions inside of the cells, those are only found in the eukaryotes. And you can kind of think about it, it makes sense. They're going to require a lot of very specific instructions to build those things and to make them operate properly and to make them cooperate the way they need to. And so in order to have that amount of intricacy, you're going to have a lot of instructions to make that work, right? And so a eukaryote has to have a lot of DNA, which is the instructions. And so in order to keep that DNA organized and safe for those cells, it needs to be inside of the nucleus. And so that's really the difference between the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes. I just wanted to kind of show this diagram here because it's kind of an interesting one that kind of shows that evolutionary forking point that split off the bacterians and then everything else. These phylogenetic trees do change a lot as we get more evidence, more DNA evidence, more evolutionary evidence, but it's a fun example of kind of that split between the domain bacteria and then the Archaeans and the eukaryotes as being kind of on their own separate branch on that very simplified tree of life.